Hi, we're back. Let's go to slide 9. We're looking at Piaget's theory of formal operations here. So Piaget's theory of cognitive development. We're on our last step here. We're in formal operations. So formal operations is about 12 years, and he said finishes around 15 to 18, but we'll talk about that. So again, we're going to talk about Piaget here when we're talking about cognitive development. I want to talk about information processing for a moment, and then we're going to finish off, and I'm going to start a next video on this idea of social topics and how adolescents view themselves. So looking at cognition, but in more of a social way. Okay, according to Piaget, stage of formal operations is around 11 or 12. As I said, 15 to 20 completion. Now remember, children in that concrete operations, they perform those simple tasks. We talked about that last week. They require some logic, some systematic thinking is being practiced. But formal operations is that next step, okay? We're talking about reasoning, right? Talking about complex tasks, problems involving lots of different options or variables, right? So we have these greater ability to take more steps in solving things. It also, part of that solving problems, right, having logic, systematic thinking, is abstract thinking. And abstract thinking is really now developing in our teenage years. So this allows our adolescents to think about abstract ideas that they just weren't fully able to get. So like topics like time and space, or abstract ideas like justice, okay? Now they can abstract think. Now they can think of justice in a wide possible way of solutions or places where justice isn't occurring on sort of the small all the way to the large sort of levels. Even if they don't have any experience with injustice or justice as a topic, they can start to think about this. So they have this abstract reasoning. Formal operations also includes hypothetical deductive reasoning, which basically is Piaget's term for scientific thinking. Our ability to take step by step, create hypotheses, test those hypotheses, gather the data, and come up with the new concepts and ideas and theories. So we can go through this hypothetical deductive reasoning as well during formal operations. He had some really interesting tests on the way he would say, okay, how do you go from concrete thinking to formal thinking? Look up the pendulum problem experiments by Piaget, and that'll show you sort of how he looked at that progression. Of course, critiques, right? These things like hypothetical deductive reasoning or abstract thinking, students seem to be better if they've taken math and science courses versus the students who haven't taken those courses. Again, it's stage theory, right? It's mastery. So these are all those same criticisms for Piaget. And also cultural differences, which is a major lucky area for Piaget here, is that they're only successful if it's relevant to their culture. So if that hypothetical deduction or that abstract concept you're posing to them, if that's not relevant to their culture, they're not going to be successful in that. And that doesn't mean that they're not able to have formal operational thinking. It's that Piaget didn't necessarily incorporate the concept of how culture plays a role in how our cognitive development proceeds. Moving to slide 10. Let's just put on this information processing hat for a moment, looking at attention. Improving, especially for middle childhood. We have some skills like selective attention that I had mentioned, right? I can focus on the relevant thing. I can sort out and ignore the other areas that aren't relevant. And now I have hypothetical abstract reasoning. I can do that. I can be like, that's what I need to pay attention to. Divided attention becomes better as well. So, reading the book, listening to the music at the same time or on their phone. So divided attention skills are definitely changed from middle childhood. So attention, overall improvement, memory, overall improvement, executive functioning, overall improvement. So we're improving, we're gaining skills, right? Memory, long-term continuing to advance. Again, we're building up our experience, building up our knowledge. And of course, this enhances our long-term memory system. Executive functioning, we talked about this, right? Those problem solving, abstract thinking, cause and effect, planning, all of those skills are improving. Still not all the way there. Executive functioning it goes all the way until we're in our 20s as far as our growth. So we're still working on these things. Slide 11. Secondary school. Okay, secondary school, high school enrollment in developed countries, that's the norm, right? We know that. Graduation rates do vary, but being at school is pretty much the norm. The majority of the world's adolescents, it's interesting when we're looking at, are they in school or are they not? So what's this based on again? The takeaway. The majority of the world's adolescents' educational fate is already determined at birth, simply in where you were born, right? So if you can look at this map, there are cultural, economic variations of why we are in or not in secondary education. Okay, so developing countries, it's difficult to attend secondary schools. There's very low graduation rates. And we even see gender differences in those rates as well. There's a lack of insufficient funding, a lack of the systems, lack of teachers, overcrowding, lots of problems as far as secondary education. But when we're talking about the transition to secondary education for kiddos in developed countries, it seems to be a hard transition to go into high school. Socially, there's challenges that can add to the school experience that might add anxieties and stress for the children socially. Academically, work is harder. There's a higher level. Grades are viewed more seriously in high school. Things get a little bit more serious for students. So that transition to secondary school tends to be challenging for adolescents in developed countries. All right, last slide here before we move into the next task. Work. Okay, what's the story here? Work. Developing countries. Just like middle childhood, developing countries, same types of difficult, poor paid, dangerous jobs that the younger children are doing as well. Many of these adolescents have started working in middle childhood, if not younger, in developing countries. In developed countries, like here, teens not typically working to support their families. Different, right? But maybe to support leisure activities, to get experience. We have high rise of internships, like especially in Europe. But we have to watch sort of balance the work out with our adolescents. We can see negative impact, especially when we're getting over 20 hours a week. 10 hours is sort of that baseline of like, okay, we don't want to go past 10 hours a week if we can, if that's a reality in life. So there's an interesting split between secondary education and where you were born, on what kind of work you're going to be doing if you're working, where you're born, so that context, that socioeconomic, and are you born into a country that's developing or a country that's developed. It's going to make a difference. Signing off, and I'm going to do one whole video on the social cognition, adolescent cognitive development. Next slide. Answer the questions and then come back to the next video. All right. Thanks, everyone.